Bob, thank you for your word. Thank you so much for the things you've spoken to us this weekend. And we just trust you, Father, that you are good and that you want to help us. And we just ask you to speak to us more now and cause the seeds of faith to grow in our hearts, Lord. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. Well, I apologize, but some of this is going to sound like review. It was wonderful, really, but Billy covered a lot of things I have, and then Ben, too, said some things I wanted to share. But one thing that I wanted to do, first of all, my topic is the faith of Moses' parents. I don't even know their names, just Moses' parents, when I'm told their names. But I wanted to look at that book of Hebrews just a tiny little bit and get an idea, which Billy did some of this last night. But just to review a little to see what our faith is based upon, what our trust is based upon in God. And I just wanted to say what you already know, but faith is not a feeling or a state of mind that we generate through great effort. Faith is not an emotion that we drum up. Does that make sense? So sometimes I've probably been guilty of this. It's just like, oh, if I close my eyes hard enough and just like focus my mind, I can believe, I can drum up this faith. That's not what we're talking about. So the book of Hebrews, just very briefly, it explains our redemption. It explains how God, who once spoke to us through the prophets, now has spoken to us through his Son. It explains how Jesus is our great high priest and how his sacrifice has paid the price once for all for our sin, and how we can have full assurance to draw near to God because of the blood of Jesus. There are warnings throughout Hebrews, warnings to not neglect the salvation that God has provided. 10:23 in Hebrews says, "Let us hold fast to the confession of our hope without wavering, for he who promised is faithful." And in 10:36, Billy read this last night, "For you have need of endurance, so that when you have done the will of God, you may receive what is promised." Hebrews teaches us that the righteous ones live by faith. And again, but we are not those who shrink back and are destroyed, but are of those of the faith who preserve their souls. So our faith is not based on an emotional feeling that we can drum up in and of ourselves. It's based on this work that God has done through Jesus. It's based on a solid foundation of this work of God. And you need to know that. So, and faith is absolutely necessary. The writer of Hebrews says, it's absolutely necessary for our lives in God. We have to walk by faith. And it's based on God's own faithfulness to his covenant with his people. So let's look now at Moses. And it's chapter 11 of Hebrews. It's just one little blurb about his parents. 11:23 says, "By faith, Moses, when he was born, was hidden for 3 months by his parents, because they saw that the child was beautiful, and they were not afraid of the king's edict." So that's what we get. They had a child, and they saw him, they loved him, they saw promise in him, so it was beautiful, and they did not fear the king's edict. So that's what we read. So I want to go back, though, because my first point is that faith works in the context of God's plans and purposes. Faith is based on this work of God and Jesus. And it also, where we see faith in the Word, this trust in God, it's not for some personal little project I have on the side. It's in the building of his kingdom, we walk by faith. So my faith is happening. I'm part of the story of God. So Moses is a part of the story of God, and his parents played, it seemed like a small role, but in the end, a big role in the story that God is writing. So if we just back up, and sometimes you guys know this by heart, but I just think we need to paint this picture of the big story, and I'll do it as concisely as I can. So we know that God by his word, created the world. He created the universe. And we know that in doing that, his ultimate intention was relationship with us. So God, the three in one, decided, I want to relate to these. I want to have a relationship with these people. I want to create these people and have a relationship with them. So he started the whole thing off, but then of course we know what happened, the rebellion. And there's that prophecy right after Adam and Eve sinned, where God says actually to the serpent that Eve's offspring will bruise the head of the serpent. So this is part of God's story that he's writing. He prophesies he's going to make this happen. Later on we see that God destroys most of the world. All but Noah and his sons were destroyed. But he makes a covenant that he's not going to deal with sin that way again. Later on, we see him calling Abraham. We're just all studying that recently. And in calling Abraham, he said, I will be your God, you will be my people. I'm going to bless you, you're going to bless the world. So this is something God is doing. He's still doing it today. Then we see, Abraham has his son Isaac. Isaac has Jacob. Jacob has Joseph and many other sons. And hopefully know the Old Testament story. Joseph is sold into slavery. He ends up, by God's power, working for Pharaoh down in Egypt. And in a time of famine, all the Israelites go down there. Joseph's brothers and their family, at that point there aren't that many of them. I think it's like 70-something. And so that's where the story picks up with Moses. So that's sort of the backdrop. God is at work in the earth. There's something going on. He's got a plan. And let's find out what happens with Moses. So now I'm going to go back to Exodus and read a little bit. Okay, so these brothers and Joseph I was talking about going down to Egypt, that's where we're picking up in the story. These are the names of the sons of Israel who came to Egypt with Jacob, each with his household. Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, and Benjamin, Dan and Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. All the descendants of Jacob were 70 persons. Joseph was already in Egypt. Then Joseph died. Okay, so the plot thickens. Joseph died, and all his brothers and all that generation. So time has passed. All those people have died off now. But the people of Israel were fruitful and increased greatly. They multiplied and grew exceedingly strong, so that the land was filled with them. Now there arose a new king over Egypt, who did not know Joseph. And he said to his people, behold, the people of Israel are too many and too mighty for us. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply. And if war breaks out, they join our enemies and fight against us and escape the land. Did I tell you that? I'm still in chapter 1 of Exodus. I don't think I told you where it was. I'm now on to verse 11. Sorry, I'm not a good preacher. Okay. Therefore, they set taskmasters over them to afflict them with heavy burdens. Do you get it? Like, we've read this so much, we have to stop and really come outside ourselves and hear it fresh and new. Here are the children of promise. These are the people that are going to bless the world. And just what happened, they just got taken into slavery. They have become slaves. God's promised people, his people. How are they going to be a blessing now they've been made slaves? So here, let's keep going. They built for Pharaoh store cities. Going down verse 12. But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied, and the more they spread abroad. And the Egyptians were in dread of the people of Israel. So they ruthlessly made the people of Israel work as slaves, and made their lives bitter with hard service, in mortar and brick, and in all kinds of work in the field. In all their work, they ruthlessly made them work as slaves. So this is a terrible circumstance. Now these people who were the promise are in slavery. Then the king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, it gets worse. It's about to get really worse. So he says to the midwives, verse 16, when you serve as a midwife to the Hebrew women and see them on the birth stool, if it is a son, you shall kill him. But if it is a daughter, she shall live. But the midwives feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, but let the male children live. So the king of Egypt called the midwives and said to them, why have you done this and let the male children live? The midwives said to Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, for they are vigorous and give birth before the midwife comes to them. So God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and grew very strong. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families. Then Pharaoh commanded all his people, "Every son that is born to the Hebrews you shall cast into the Nile, but you shall let every daughter live." Okay, so we're caught up in the story. You know where we are in God's plan and God's story that he's writing. Now a man from the house of Levi went and took as his wife a Levite woman. The woman conceived and bore a son, and when she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him 3 months. When she could hide him no longer, she took for him a basket made of bulrushes and daubed it with bitumen and pitch. She put the child in it and placed it among the reeds by the riverbank. And his sister stood at a distance to know what would be done to him. Now the daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river. While her young women walked beside the river, she saw the basket among the reeds and sent her servant woman, and she took it. When she opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the baby was crying. She took pity on him and said, "This is one of the Hebrews' children." Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and call a nurse from the Hebrew women to nurse the child for you?" And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Go." So the girl went and called the child's mother. And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this child away and nurse him for me, and I will give you wages." So the woman took the child and nursed him. When the child grew older, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. She named him Moses, because she said, "I drew him out of the water." So that's Moses' beginning. That's the beginning of his story. So I wanted to say that faith works in the context of God's plans and purposes. God was working out his plan, and in the midst of that, his people are called to interact with him, to hear and to obey him, even to do scary things and to stand in the face of great adversity. It would be great adversity if our sons were all being thrown into the Nile. And in the face of that, we're supposed to trust him and obey him and to not lose hope. Our faith is what keeps us in his plan and enables us to please God by trusting and obeying him. So I already said this, faith isn't a magical power by which our personal agenda gets built, although it is very personal. It's not the power of positive thinking to get something done that I need for myself, but it's the way that I walk with God and obey him because I trust him. So we're in God's story, just like Moses. God is laying out for us good works to do, his kingdom to be built by us and others, and his kingdom being built, not just when I say that, I don't just mean we're sharing the gospel and getting people saved. He first has to build a kingdom in us. He has to root out his enemy that still lurks in the corners of our hearts. So he's building his kingdom in us and outside us. Okay, and we must walk by faith to do this. Okay, in order for God to get his will done, for us to be a blessing to the world, we need this faith. So that's, I think, an important thing to know about faith. The second point that I want to bring out is that Moses' parents did not fear what man would do to them. Their eyes were not fixed on the problem, but their faith was fixed on God. Their eyes were fixed on God, and we have to do this too. If we look at our circumstances, as Ben said, like seeing, oh, we're just in this closed system, there are no resources. If we walk in fear like that, we can't have faith. That's the opposite of faith. And I think about those parents, and I think they must have known that what could happen to them too and the rest of the family by hiding him. I'm not sure, the Bible doesn't tell us all the details, but I imagine you could be in trouble. Like, for doing that, they could have lost their lives, or their other children could have, but they hid the baby for 3 months. It probably could have been scary, but they weren't afraid, because I think it kind of goes back to, this is going out on a limb, but I think that the promise, that offspring of Eve that would crush Satan's head, was going to come through a child, the next generation being born, and I feel like they saw that promise, and to keep that child alive was a work of God, for God's will to be done, for that child to live. Does that make sense? Like, so I think that was in their hearts. They know that story, they knew that story, and so down deep, I think that's one reason life is so important. You know, we value life as Christians because God's purposes are filled through the next life and the next life and the next generation. Okay, so a couple of verses about fear. Proverbs 29:25 says, "Fear of man will prove to be a snare, but whoever trusts in the Lord is kept safe." And we see that was true for Moses. He was kept safe. The because his parents did not fear man. And I know that that's been a struggle for me, like having fear of man. And it really does prevent you from obeying things God would call you to do when you walk in a fear of man. So if you see that in yourself, or your friend points it out to you, really pray and ask God to give you a reverent, holy fear of him rather than a fear of people around you. Okay. Matthew 10:28 says, "Do not be afraid of those who kill the body but cannot kill the soul. Rather be afraid of the one who can destroy both body and soul." And I think this goes back to Billy's point last night when he was talking about the reason faith works in Christians is because we're not tied up in it happening in our lifetime or for our benefit. Our heart, our 110% commitment is to God's will happening in the earth. That might happen after we're dead. So our lives are not the important part. The length of our life, the happiness, the comfort of our lives is not our point. So we can put our full faith, not fear death. The reason you don't fear man is because what can man do to you but kill your body? But we know that we have resurrection life in Jesus. So I think that's an important point. If your goal is on yourself or your own life being right or happy, faith is going to be hard for you. You're going to struggle. Because we put our eyes past our own life. We put our eyes on the kingdom of God and what he's doing ultimately. Okay. Let's see. I'm trying to read my writing here. I added a note. Okay. I was going to say something else about fear. Those verses I brought out were about the fear of man. But we ladies know that sometimes it's not man that we fear, but it could be something like we could be afraid of our own inability. We can find things to be afraid about, can't we? So, fear is bad. All kinds of fear is bad. That's all I wanted to say. So my next point, I'm moving kind of fast because I know you all are tired, probably. Okay. The next thing I wanted to point out is that Moses' parents, they exerted their faith on behalf of their child. And I just think they were thinking about him. They were thinking, I'm going to put my faith, my trust in God for this child's benefit. And faith is very active. Faith is not just something, a state of mind, but it is something you do. So because they put their faith in God for their child, they did things for their child, right? They hid him for 3 months, and when it was no longer possible to hide him, the mom created this little basket, made it waterproof, put him in there. She took a real step of faith, putting him in the water and waiting for someone to come by. So I'm saying that I think we need to do that too. And it's not just if you have kids. Most of you have children in here. If you have children, you need to be exerting your faith toward your children, like praying for them, believing God for them. And if you don't have children, pray for my children. Pray for each other's kids. We're all kind of responsible, I think, in this body. So it wasn't just only to preserve the life of the baby so he could have a happy life because he was a cute kid, but they saw within him the potential for God to work his will through this child. So, especially spiritually these days, like, unless they're unborn, your children likely aren't going to be killed. I mean, there are risks of actual physical death in the world. But spiritually speaking, we need to know that our children are in danger of spiritual death in this world, and we need to exert our faith over them. And we must not infect our children with a fear of man. They need to see us believing God on their behalf. And so we can show them by example how to fear God. And we can't just save them for ourselves. This leads into the next point. But so that they can fulfill their part of God's story. So what we begin in faith, especially with our kids, or this could not just be kids, this could be like spiritual offspring. Anybody we're sharing with and caring for and taking care of. I think this is an important point. We can often get excited and we can start in faith, we can begin in faith, but we really have to finish in faith. We have to walk the long walk in faith. And Jesus was there too. God was so kind and gracious in the way he provided for Moses and the mom. I just remember as a child reading that story, and I was so happy. I was like, not only did her son get saved, but she got paid to nurse him. Like, that was so, like, who but God would think of that? And, but then then when I kept reading the story, I'd get really sad, because what's the rest of the story? Once he's weaned, which they did it later back then, I think, but once he's weaned, she takes him to Pharaoh's house and gives him back to the daughter. That is continuing in faith, to give up your child to God's purposes. And maybe she had a sense that God had a reason for placing him in Pharaoh's house. And so she endured suffering. You know that broke her mommy's heart to not see her kid. But she endured that suffering because she trusted God. So that's an important point for us. And I want to say, this is the third point. I'm starting to get Chad, or maybe it's fourth. I'm starting to get that problem that Chad has where you can't. Okay, Audrey says it's fourth point. Moses' parents' faith, so the faith of his parents, caused this child, and the way they sacrificed by giving him up out of the, they would have him in their own family. Moses brought about the salvation from slavery of the Israelites because they had faith. Look what God did through this child, Moses. And I'll just read a little bit about. Well, back in Hebrews, even before chapter 11, it's, I think it's chapter 3, Jesus is actually compared to Moses. In that Moses was faithful to God, Jesus was faithful to God just like Moses was. So that's pretty big time. If you get a comparison to Jesus in the Bible, Moses had a lot of faith. And in verse 5 it says, Moses, he was faithful in all God's house as a servant to testify to the things that were spoken later. And then like the parents get that one little sentence in Hebrews chapter 11, Moses gets more. So it's like, it says, just really quickly, by faith Moses, I already read that one. That's when he gets born and his parents had faith. Now, 24, chapter 11, verse 24, by faith Moses, when he was grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to be mistreated with the people of God than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. He considered the reproach of Christ greater wealth than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking to the reward. By faith he left Egypt, not fearing man, not being afraid of the anger of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible. By faith he kept the Passover and sprinkled the blood so that the destroyer of the firstborn might not touch them. By faith the people crossed the Red Sea, that was under Moses' leadership, as on dry land, but the Egyptians were drowned. So, it's incredible. I think Billy said last night, like these small decisions that we make in faith there are great consequences to them. There are also great consequences when we choose not to walk in faith, ladies. And that's kind of sobering, isn't it? I mean, God's so gracious. I mean, how many times has he forgiven us and helped us get back on the right track? But there are major consequences when we choose not to walk in faith. But when we choose to walk in faith, God does amazing things, like bringing about Moses into the world who set God's people free. And it's not consequences. This is probably important too. I don't know when Moses' parents died. I don't know how long they lived, but the consequences of our lives, it's hard to believe this or see it, but the repercussions go on for generations. Really does. Like our kids and their children and their children's children, all the people they touch, there are major consequences to repercussions for our faith. And this is a freebie. Let's see. Oh yeah, I don't have tons of, I won't keep you forever, but I have other thoughts. So I wanted to say that faith I think it does sound like a religious term and it's like impactful, so I like that Billy called it trusting God. It does begin in our hearts and minds. It's kind of a mindset that some of us maybe need to shift the way we think. And it's based on evidence though. Our thinking, our trusting God is based on good, solid evidence. And there are things that we can look back and see how God's worked and is faithful. Sometimes it's like Hebrews says, the evidence is not seen. but we know his character, we know his ways, we know God's personality, we know what he's like, we know what he's going to do, if we will open our eyes and see how good he is. And one way, this is something that Kelly Hahn shared at our church. It's a great sermon. I believe it was on January 4th. If you want to look at our website and listen to it, it's really good. He was talking about faith, although I don't think he used that word in particular. But he said a prayer that he's going to be praying this whole year as a way to change his mindset is very simple, 7 words. I believe God will help me. And it's in the purpose, again, the context is in fulfilling the purposes of God in our life. We need to start every day saying, I believe God will help me. These things he's called us to do, he will help us. And we need to keep saying it over and over. Maybe you need to hear it, maybe you need to tell yourself this every hour of the day to start out with. And you will change your thinking from a negative, fearful mindset to I believe God will help me. Probably many of you have read Dallas Willard in our church. We're reading Hearing God. I'm not sure if he says it in that particular book, but he says, may sound a little odd to you, that God is kind and helpful. Those aren't the words we usually think of. He's omniscient, he's omnipresent, he's holy, he's just, he's merciful, but he's also very kind and helpful. He wants to help us, and you can read scripture. He's also holy. All those other things are still true. But he desires to help us when we're doing his purposes. And we're trying to become more like him. He really will help us. So I think, I believe God will help me. I believe God will help me. Okay, and I think, so it starts here in the mind, and as you really believe that God will help you, it will result in actions. It will result in obedience. So, and I think that's kind of what Billy was talking about last night. We can choose to trust God and obey. It will result in obedience when we choose to trust God. So, I was thinking of that old song, and I think, man, we didn't need a whole retreat. We could just sing this song, Trust and Obey. Do you know that song? It's so true. Because if we're saying faith means trust, hear a pitch still, anybody? Maybe that's the air getting on. I was trying to remember the words. These might not be quite correct, but this morning this is what I remembered. When we walk with the Lord in the light of his word, what a glory he sheds on our way. As we do his good will, he delights in us still, and with all who will trust and obey. Trust and obey, for there's no other way to be happy in Jesus but to trust and obey. And I think that just sums it up so well. We trust him, he is good. He is a good father. When we are suffering, he is still a good father. When our kid is dead, he is still good and trustworthy. When we can't seem to break a habit that we've struggled with for years, he is good and he wants to help us and he will help us. So I think that's all I've got for right now. But anybody have thoughts they want to share? This is a small enough group. We can have some conversation about it. Is anybody just encouraged this weekend about walking by faith and not by sight? Encouraged? I am. I thought it's really good. Really encouraging. Hey, ladies. Come see.
I'm going to say something.
Please do. I would love for you to.
You can think so fast and speak so fast. But I'm going to repeat back something you said. But
okay.
I have to find it in all my notes. Somebody else can talk. Oh, yeah. Faith works in the context of God's plans and purposes. He says, I will bless you, you will bless the world. In the midst of adversity, we trust and obey. Faith is not a way to get what I want. The kingdom is built in us and others as we have faith. So I think that we all know this, but the laying down of our kingdom helps us to have faith. His bigger kingdom. And so then we're not so scared and we're not so selfish.
Yeah. It really makes you not getting your eyes off
Yeah.
yourself. It's key. It sounded better when you said it.
No. I couldn't find it.
You should have got it.
It sounded better when you said it.
I was looking, anybody else have anything to share? Yes.
I really appreciate this. This has been something that's been on my heart a lot, I think. Especially as you get kids who are growing up and becoming teenagers and adults, you really have to let them go. And so that's the thing that the Lord really spoke to me about a month ago and said, you can't save your kids. We cannot save our kids. We cannot make our kids love God. We can't make our kids follow God. But we labor in prayer for our kids. And so that's where God has me, just laboring and laboring. And I see God moving, and it's exciting. But just want to encourage us that, it's not us. I mean, we can do everything we know that God's called us to do, but in the end, it has to be, they have to choose God.
That's right. Yep. And nothing is closer to our hearts than our kids, man. We want them to get it.
Another thing you said is something about fear, which I can't find right now, but fear is, like if you're filled with fear, you cannot be filled with faith. They're opposite.
Yeah.
So you have to stop fearing that what you want will happen, and then you can have faith. But God's bigger and he'll do this.